The Alpha King had already buried 3 queens when he bound me to him. They say his mates never live long enough to give him an heir. I learned why the night he whispered, "I will not touch you until you beg me to." I was 22 the night my life was traded for a kingdom. Iron shackles bit into my wrists as they dragged me through the great hall, past banners soaked in my family's blood and glory. At the end of the aisle, he waited on the obsidian throne, the Alpha King everyone whispered about in terror. Jonathan. Bigger than any warrior I had ever seen, all corded muscle and old scars, with eyes like molten amber fixed on me as if I were prey he had already claimed. The binding circle flared beneath my bare feet, ancient runes burning my omega scent into the stone. I told myself I would endure him, hate him, fight him in every silent way I could until the curse that killed his queens finally took me too. Then he rose, stepped into the circle, caged my chin in his calloused hand, and growled against my mouth. "I will not stop until you carry my heir." Yet when the magic sealed us together and my body shook with terror, the Monster King only stepped back and said, very softly, "I will not touch you until you beg me to." They removed the hood just before the gates opened, as if the king deserved to see every flicker of my fear. Cold air slapped my face, sharp with iron and snow, and the sour scent of too many wolves in one place. The royal fortress rose ahead of us, carved straight from the mountain, its black stone walls knifing into a bruised sky. Torches burned along the battlements, casting a hungry orange glow over the courtyard where soldiers in dark armor watched my approach like they were already picturing my execution. I kept my chin high anyway. My father always said a stone never bowed, even with a sword at the back of her neck. He had bowed in the end. I had watched him do it in the judgment hall, knees cracking on marble, voice shaking as he begged the king for mercy that never came. Treason, they called it, plotting against the crown, trading secrets to rival packs. Maybe some of it was even true. It didn't matter. The verdict was already written the moment House Stone fell out of favor. The chains between my wrists clanked as the guards shoved me forward. My ankles were cuffed too, the short length of iron forcing small steps that made me feel like a child learning how to walk again. Omegas were supposed to be protected, cherished, kept behind silk and smiles. I had grown up believing that lie. Tonight the metal biting into my skin told me exactly what my scent was worth when a kingdom needed a sacrifice. The massive gate creaked open and swallowed us whole. Inside, the fortress was worse. The courtyard teemed with warriors, their armor etched with the king's sigil, a crown wrapped in the jaws of a wolf. Eyes tracked me from every corner, curious, contemptuous, hungry. News travels fast in a kingdom ruled by an alpha who has buried 3 queens. Everyone wants to see the next doomed bride. A guard jerked my chain. "Move, Omega." I bit the inside of my cheek and walked. We passed training yards stained with old blood, a row of cages that still smelled faintly of prisoners and fear, and a high tower where ravens circled, black against the storm clouds. I told myself to catalog everything, every door and shadow and guard rotation. Not because I believed I could escape, but because pretending I could kept me from breaking. They led me into the heart of the fortress, through a pair of towering doors of dark wood banded with iron. Heat rolled out to meet us, along with the thick scent of smoke, fur, and dominance so heavy it made my lungs stutter. The throne hall, the ceiling soared high above, lost in shadows. Stone pillars flanked a long strip of obsidian that ran like a river from the doors to the dais at the far end. Banners hung between the pillars, crimson cloth emblazoned with that devouring crown sigil. Braziers lined the walls, flames snapping and spitting, throwing light over the crowd already gathered to witness the spectacle. And at the center of it all, waiting on his throne, carved from a single block of black stone, sat the Monster King, Alpha Jonathan. Rumors had painted him 100 different ways. Some said he was half feral, more beast than man, kept chained when he wasn't fighting. Others swore he was cold as ice, a strategist who never dirtied his own hands, killing with signatures instead of claws. A few whispered about the curse, how every queen he took died before she could quicken with his heir, as if the moon herself refused to let his bloodline continue. None of those stories prepared me for the reality. He didn't look like a man wasting away under a curse. He looked like war given a body. He was enormous, even seated, shoulders so broad the armor over them seemed barely able to contain him. Dark leather and metal molded to his torso, the plates scarred from old battles that no court artisan had been allowed to polish away. His bare forearms were corded with muscle, veins standing out against tanned skin, hands relaxed on the arms of the throne but never truly at rest. Long dark hair was pulled back from his face in warrior braids threaded with small rings of silver, catching the firelight when he moved. And oh, those scars. A white line cut through his left eyebrow and disappeared into his hairline. Another jagged mark traced the side of his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. This was not a king who hid behind others. He carried every war he'd ever fought on his skin. But it was his eyes that stole the air from my chest. Amber, molten and sharp, they locked onto me the moment I stepped into the hall. The murmurs of the gathered court faded to a low buzz in my ears. I could feel his gaze the way I felt heat from an open flame, too intense, too focused, as if he were weighing every ounce of me and finding nothing he hadn't expected. No softness there, but no wildness either, just lethal calculation. I had promised myself I wouldn't bow. I didn't. The guards forced me to my knees instead. The chains rattled as they shoved my shoulders down, palms biting into flesh already bruised. My forehead almost touched the cold obsidian at my knees. The stone thrummed faintly under my skin, like a heartbeat I couldn't place. Power lived in this hall, old and bitter and hungry. It recognized me. The Omega offered up like a lamb on a black altar. "Raise her," a voice said, his voice. Deep, roughened by use and command, it rolled through my bones like distant thunder. The guards hauled me upright until I was kneeling, but no longer forced to bow. My neck prickled as I looked up, meeting the gaze of the man who owned my fate. Jonathan considered me in silence. He didn't leer the way some alphas did when they looked at Omegas. He didn't sneer in disgust at the treason mark burned into the skin just visible above the torn collar of my dress. His gaze swept over me once, taking in the chains, the bruises, the way I instinctively angled my body as if it could shield my scent from so many watching noses. Then his eyes returned to my face and stayed there. "What is your name?" he asked. The crowd reacted to that, soft gasps and low whispers. The king didn't know the name of the woman being bound to him. That was how little I mattered. My mouth was dry. "Kira Stone, your majesty." Something flickered in his eyes at my surname, gone so quickly I almost doubted I'd seen it. "A stone," he said. The last one, heat burned behind my eyes, but I forced my chin higher. "So it seems." A corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, not quite contempt. Then he rose. The hall seemed to tilt around me as he descended the steps from the throne. 1 pace, 2, 3. Every movement was controlled, deliberate, the easy prowl of a predator who has never once been prey. Warriors shifted aside as he passed, not because he needed the space, but because they couldn't help it. His presence pressed against my skin, thick and heavy, making my Omega instincts whimper even as my mind screamed. "Run," those instincts whispered, uselessly, submit, survive. I dug my nails into my palms until pain cleared the fog. He stopped a breath away from me. Up close, he smelled of pine forests after rain, steel, and something darker underneath, old magic and older blood. His shadow fell over me, swallowing the weak warmth from the braziers. "Remove her chains," he said. My head snapped toward him. Shock rippled through the crowd like wind over tall grass. The guard to my left hesitated. "Sire, she is—" "An Omega," Jonathan cut in, voice mild in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Not a rabid dog. The chains—" Keys jingled. Cold metal loosened around my wrists, then my ankles. The weight fell away and left my limbs numb and strangely light. I rubbed at the raw skin unconsciously, eyes still fixed on him, unable not to be. "Stand," he ordered. My legs shook, but I obeyed. Standing brought me only to the level of his chest. The armor there was marked with a deep claw scratch, 4 parallel grooves that hadn't been buffed smooth. His heart beat steady beneath him, unbothered. He reached out, and reflex made me flinch. His hand didn't grab or shove. Instead, calloused fingers caught my chin, tilting my face up until I had no choice but to meet his gaze. The contact sent a jolt down my spine, a sharp crackle of bond magic waking beneath my skin like a sleeping beast stirred. The hall went silent. Even the torches seemed to hold their breath. The old runes carved into the obsidian floor around us began to glow, faint at first, then brighter, threads of silver and crimson twining together in a pattern I didn't recognize but my bones did. Binding magic, ancient and absolute. You can still run, some foolish part of me thought. You have legs, there are doors, there is air. But the truth settled, heavy as stone. There was nowhere to go that his reach wouldn't follow, nowhere in this kingdom or beyond, where the scent of his claim wouldn't find me once the bond sealed. His eyes never left mine as the magic rose, wrapping around my wrists, my throat, my heart. It felt like stepping into cold water, then fire, then something that was neither, pain and relief tangled together. My lungs seized. The wolf inside me shuddered, then curled toward him helplessly, recognizing its match. "Repeat after me," Jonathan said quietly, his voice for me alone despite the watching court. "I, Kira Stone, stand willingly in this circle." The word willingly was a lie, a sharp stone on my tongue. But my father's face flashed in my mind, hollow eyes, shaking hands, the sound of the executioner's axe being sharpened just outside his cell. Jonathan could have taken my life along with his without bothering with this ceremony. Instead, he had offered a bargain, my freedom for my father's head or my future for my father's life. I swallowed. I, Kira Stone, stand willingly in this circle. The runes flared. He recited the rest, ancient words binding my fate to his, and I echoed them, each syllable stitching another invisible thread between us. By the time the last vow left my mouth, the magic had sunk so deep it felt like it lived in my bones. A sharp sting at my wrist made me gasp. I looked down to see a new mark burning into my skin, glowing the same molten amber as his eyes, a crown encircled by the faint outline of a wolf's jaw. His sigil, on my body, forever. My world narrowed to that brand, to the weight of his hand still on my chin, to the knowledge settling like ice in my gut. There would be no running, no waking up from this. The binding was complete. I had just become the fourth queen of a cursed king, and for the first time since the shackles closed around my wrists, I realized that death might have been the kinder sentence. The guards left me after the binding, and silence settled over the chamber like another layer of stone. The room was beautiful in the way cages sometimes are. A fire crackled in the hearth, spilling warmth over furs piled on the bed. Tall windows showed a slice of moon and endless forest, a reminder that the world was still out there somewhere, beyond walls I would never cross again. I stood in the center, rubbing my wrist where his mark now burned faintly under my skin. The sigil pulsed in time with a heartbeat that wasn't mine, a low, constant thrum tugging toward the heart of the fortress. Toward him. My wolf leaned into that pull, tail high, eager, traitorous. I curled my fingers into a fist until my nails dug crescents into my palm. "Stop it," I whispered to myself. "He is not yours." The bond hummed anyway. I paced until my legs ached, until the fire sank lower and the room filled with long shadows. Every thought turned into a loop. My father kneeling in the judgment hall, the binding circle flaring beneath my feet, Jonathan's fingers on my chin as the magic took hold. By the time the lock on my door turned, I was strung so tight that the soft click sounded like a blade leaving its sheath. I was on my feet before the door opened. He filled the doorway all hard lines and shadow. No armor now, only a dark shirt stretched over his chest and plain black trousers tucked into worn boots. His hair, freed from its braids, fell loose around his shoulders, making him look less like a polished king and more like the wild thing the stories warned about. My wolf recognized him instantly. "Mine," it whispered, thrilled. I took a step back until my shoulders hit cold stone. "Your Majesty," I managed, hating the crack in my voice. "Jonathan," he said, closing the door with a quiet click that sounded far too final. "In private, you will call me Jonathan." He stayed where he was, back against the door, arms loose at his sides. He did not stalk toward me or reach for me. He only watched, eyes moving over my face, my clenched fists, the way I leaned away from him even as the bond pulled me closer. "You're afraid," he said. I let out a strangled laugh. "You dragged me from my home in chains, bound me with ancient magic, branded me in front of your entire court, and locked me in a fortress I cannot leave. What could I possibly have to be afraid of?" Something flickered at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "Sit, Kira, we need to speak. I'll stand. I prefer my queen upright," he said calmly. "Not passed out on the floor when she hears what I'm about to tell her." Queen. The word hit like a blow. It didn't belong to me, it belonged to the women who had stood here before me and now lay in graves. My knees wobbled anyway. I moved to the armchair near the fire and sat, spine straight, hands tight together to hide the tremor. He crossed the room and took the chair opposite, leaving the low table and far too little air between us. Even without touching me, his presence filled the space, heavy as his crown. For a moment he watched the flames. Light slid over the scars on his knuckles, over the long line of his throat. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost the cold edge he'd used in the throne hall. It sounded older, rougher. "You know the stories," he said, "about my queens." "Everyone knows the stories. Tell me," he said. "I want to hear what they say." It felt like a trap, but I answered. "They say your first queen, Alina of Silvercrest, died in her sleep after a year of marriage. No wounds, no poison. She just stopped. The second, the Alpha Princess from across the sea, fell from the ramparts on a clear day. The third collapsed during her blessing ceremony. The healers couldn't save her." His jaw tightened at that, muscle ticking once. "And the gossip's conclusion? That you're cursed," I said. "That the moon goddess refuses to let your line continue." Silence dropped between us like a stone. Then he nodded once. "For once, they are not entirely wrong." Cold slid down my spine. "So it's true. There's an old curse on my blood," he said. "Older than this fortress, older than the throne. My great-grandfather butchered an allied pack rather than share land. Their seer bled out on his floor and promised him our line would die with grief. No mate living long enough to give us an heir." He turned his palm up, staring at it as if he could see the stain of that night. "My father called it superstition. He took 4 mates. None carried his child to term. 2 died screaming. He turned to darker bargains after that. Blood magic, forbidden runes, omegas taken from their beds in the night. By the time he died, the curse had feasted enough to last generations." My stomach twisted. "And you?" "When I took the crown, I swore to rule differently," he said. "But a vow does not erase blood. I believed strength and will were enough to break a dead woman's words. I married. The curse disagreed." "You kept marrying," I whispered, knowing what might happen. "I am king," he said flatly. "Without an heir, this kingdom fractures the moment I fall. There are alphas waiting for that crack, sharpening their knives. You saw some of them tonight." "So you offered those women power and titles and let them gamble their lives for your succession." "I warned them," he said. "They chose with clear eyes. It doesn't excuse their deaths, but I will not paint them as lambs dragged to slaughter. They were queens. They chose." "And still died," I said. His throat worked. "And still died." The fire popped. Somewhere far below, a wolf howled, the sound distant and lonely. "Why me?" I asked. "Why drag a traitor's daughter into your curse?" His gaze settled on my face, sharp and searching. "Because I learned something. The curse does not simply kill. It strains the bond until it rots from the inside. Fear, resentment, hatred. Every queen grew to despise me before the end. Some quietly, some loudly enough to shake the walls. The words cut deeper than I expected. I had wanted to hate him. Hearing others had done so first made it feel unoriginal. But when the binding circle flared around you," he went on, "the bond felt different, stronger, wilder. The seers felt it too. They believe the curse can be broken, but not by ceremony or duty. It demands something else." "What?" My voice barely made it past my lips. "True bond," he said. "Not just magic forcing our souls together. Choice, acceptance, you reaching for me." I stared at him. "You expect me to fall in love with you to break an ancient curse?" "I expect nothing," he replied softly. "I am telling you the cost. And if I don't pay it, then the curse does what it always does." His eyes didn't waver. "You sicken, slowly. Headaches, lungs that don't quite fill, a heart that falters. One morning, you don't wake up." The room tilted. I gripped the arms of the chair until my fingers hurt. "You could have left that part out. For once, no one is lying to you," he said. "Not your father, not the court, only me, and the truth." Anger surged up, hot enough to burn through the fear. "You still force the binding?" "Yes," he said, and his voice roughened. "Because without it, your father would already be dead and your house wiped from every record. I gave you a cruel choice, Kira, but it was a choice." I pushed to my feet, needing distance from him, from the bond humming louder with every heartbeat. I went to the window and braced my hands on the cold stone. Moonlight silvered the forest. It looked peaceful, safe, a lie. "So my options are simple," I said. "Give myself to you and hope it somehow saves us, or cling to my hatred and wait for it to kill me." Behind me, his chair creaked as he rose. His scent came closer, pine, steel, smoke, wrapping around my nerves until my wolf leaned back into it. He stopped just out of reach. "There is a third path," he said. I closed my eyes. "Of course there is." "You can choose not to choose," he said. "Live here under my protection. Train, study, speak to me when you wish. Ignore me when you don't. I will not touch you. The bond will hum, but I will not pull on it." I turned my head slightly. "And the curse? It waits," he said. "It feeds on bonds pushed to breaking. If we never test ours, it may sleep. It may not. No one agrees. So you're gambling our lives on the hope that one day I'll decide to crawl into your bed and save us all. For the first time," he answered, "the gamble will be yours as much as mine. I will not drag you there. If you ever come, it will be on your own feet." I faced him fully then. His eyes met mine, steady, unbearably open. There was no pity there, no manipulation I could easily name, only exhaustion and something that looked dangerously like faith. "Why give me that power?" I asked. "Because every other way has already killed someone," he said quietly. "And because when the bond snapped into place in that hall, for the first time in my cursed life, I did not feel alone." The words stole any answer I might have had. He inclined his head, almost a bow. "Hate me if it helps you breathe. Plot escapes you will never take. Learn to fight, learn to rule. But understand this, Kira Stone." His voice dropped to a low growl that vibrated through my bones. "I will not force your body or your choice. If you never come to me, we face whatever end awaits together." He stepped back, breaking the invisible pull of his nearness. The bond protested with a small, aching tug that made my chest tight. "Sleep," he said, opening the door. "Tomorrow your lessons begin." The door closed softly. The lock turned. I stood in the firelight, staring at the mark on my wrist, feeling my heartbeat trip over the echo of his. For the first time since the chains had closed around my wrists, I understood the shape of my prison. Not walls, not iron, my own choice. The days after Jonathan's visit blurred into a rhythm I hadn't chosen but couldn't escape. At dawn, a guard knocked once and waited while I dragged myself from the furs. By the time the sun cleared the peaks, I was in the training yard, boots crunching over packed snow, wrists wrapped, hair braided tight. Jonathan was always there first. He waited in the center, stripped down to a shirt that clung to his chest, sword at his hip, expression carved from stone. The first morning I arrived, I hesitated at the edge, unsure if this was punishment. "Come," he said. "If the curse is determined to kill you, I'll at least make sure you can break a few bones on your way down." I told him I was an Omega, not a soldier. He tossed me a wooden practice blade, then learned to be both. He didn't go easy on me. We started with footwork, my boots sliding clumsily while he moved like the ground belonged to him. He corrected me with short, precise instructions, never raising his voice. When I fell, he waited until I got up. When I gasped for breath, he gave me water and started again. His hands touched my shoulders, my elbows, my waist, shifting my stance. Each contact was impersonal, clinical, and it infuriated me that my skin still burned afterward. The bond hummed constantly between us, thick as winter air. Every time he stepped close, my wolf surged toward him, eager. I learned to lock my jaw, to keep my eyes on his throat instead of his mouth. At night, muscles aching, I tried to pretend the training was just another prison, but it was difficult when my body changed under his instruction. I grew faster, stronger. The soft edges my old tutors had called feminine sharpened into lean muscle. Power bloomed in my limbs, power that belonged entirely to me. Jonathan noticed. One morning, after I sent his practice blade spinning from his hand with a move he'd drilled into me 100 times, he laughed. Not the cold court sound, but something warmer, startled. "Good," he said, shaking his wrist. Again, I should have been satisfied with that victory. Instead, strange heat curled in my chest at the rough pride in his voice. Days bled into weeks. When I wasn't training, I was in the library learning the history of rival alphas or with healers who explained how the curse had taken the previous queens. At night, I lay alone, listening to wolves howl beyond the walls, guards changing shifts, distant laughter from the great hall. The bond pulsed softly, always pointing toward the same center, as if there was a compass in my chest and he was north. I told myself I hated it. The lie held until the night the first storm hit. Wind came screaming down from the mountains, hurling snow against the windows. The fire fought to stay alive, flames whipping sideways. The candles flickered out. Darkness dropped heavy, broken only by the hearth's frantic dance. That was when the knock came. Soft, once. Yes? The door opened. Jonathan filled the threshold, hair damp from snow, cloak dusted white. There were lines around his eyes that the court never saw. The outer tower was struck, he said. Lightning. This room sits beneath an old buttress. If the stone fails, you'll be crushed before anyone can reach you. My hand crept to my wrist, pressing over his mark. You'll be safe, he said quietly. Nothing more. I should have refused. But another boom rolled through the stone, and dust drifted from the ceiling. I nodded once. His rooms were deep in the keep, behind reinforced doors and a warded arch that made my skin prickle. Inside, the storm dwindled to a muted rumble. The chamber was large but not ornate. A massive bed, a blazing hearth, a table strewn with maps. It looked less like a king's suite and more like a soldier's quarters. Jonathan shrugged off his cloak. You'll take the bed? My head snapped up. Excuse me? I'll take the couch. He nodded toward furniture, near the hearth. It won't be the first time. Every story I'd heard about him crumbled a little more. You dragged me here just to give me your bed? I dragged you here so falling stone doesn't kill you, he corrected. The bed is incidental. Eventually, exhaustion won. I edged toward the bed and perched on the edge, every muscle rigid. Jonathan blew out 2 candles, letting shadows pool. You're still dressed, he observed, and staying that way. Good. It will make training easier if you don't freeze to death tonight. He took a blanket and threw it over the couch, then paused. The storm growled outside. The bond is loud in storms, he said. If it drags at you, if you feel pulled, you may lie closer. I will not touch you. Not unless you ask me to. Heat scorched my face. I am not going to ask you to, I know, he said quietly. That is why I'm telling you this now while you still believe it. He stretched out on the couch, one arm folded under his head. I lay down stiffly on the farthest edge of the bed, facing the wall. The bond hummed, a low vibration fed by the storm and his nearness. My wolf inched closer with every crash of thunder, instinct screaming for safety, for alpha, for warmth. I held out as long as I could. Another tremor rattled the stones. I flinched hard. A soft rustle came from the couch. Kira, Jonathan murmured into the dark. Come here. The command should have infuriated me. Instead, it landed in my bones like relief. I slid off the bed and crossed to the couch. He had already shifted, making space, lifting the blanket. My heart hammered. This was madness. I lay down with my back to him, as far on the edge as the narrow cushions allowed. The warmth of his body was immediate, solid and unbearably real. His arm came around me, not possessive, not wandering, simply wrapping me in heat. His hand settled, open and still, against my ribs. The bond exhaled, going from restless buzz to steady purr. Is this some twisted plan to make me dependent on you? I whispered. No, he said, voice a rumble against my shoulder. This is me making sure you sleep so you don't stab me with a practice sword tomorrow out of exhaustion. You say that like it would be a bad thing. I bleed like anyone else, Kira. I'd just rather not do it because my queen is too proud to rest. The word queen no longer sounded like a death sentence. It sounded like a title he was trying to give me without chains. I waited for his hand to move, for his breath to change, for the moment he would press closer and reveal this had been a trap. He only lay there, breathing slow and even, his body a steady wall at my back. Jonathan? I murmured after a long time. You said you'd wait until I asked. I did. You meant it? Yes. Silence stretched. Then you might be waiting forever, I said. His chest rose on a slow breath. Then forever it is? The storm raged outside. Inside the circle of his arm, I felt strange, unwelcome safety sink into my bones. The monster king who had stolen my freedom was the same man holding himself rigid to keep from taking what every instinct must be screaming to claim. Honor, I realized drowsily, was a heavier chain on him than any iron could ever be on me. I fell asleep like that, with the curse between us, the bond humming softly, and the first fragile crack forming in the wall I had built around my heart. By the 3rd week in the yard, my muscles stopped screaming and started listening. I still hit the ground plenty, but I no longer stayed there stunned. I rolled, came up on a knee, counted distances without thinking. Where at first I swung blindly, now I watched everything. how Jonathan favored his right leg when his old knee stiffened, how the captain overextended on every lunge, how younger warriors telegraphed moves with their shoulders. We started running mock scenarios. Jonathan would sketch lines in the dirt with his sword tip, walls, gates, ambush points, and tell me where his men had positioned during past battles. At first I only saw chaos. Then patterns emerged, weak flanks, predictable charges, how one small unit placed differently could have turned an entire fight. "What would you have done?" he asked one morning, tapping a crude circle that represented a rival fortress. I studied the bottleneck at the main gate. I wouldn't go for the gate at all, send a decoy unit there to pull forces in, then slip a smaller team through the west ravine. It's steeper, but they'd never expect assault from that angle. "It's barely passable in snow," he said. "So send your best climbers," I countered, "or go in summer instead of winter like an impatient idiot." The captain choked on a laugh. Jonathan's eyes narrowed in concentration. "We tried the gate," he said finally. "Lost 30 men for nothing. The ravine would have worked." That afternoon, he sent for me during a strategy meeting. The war room smelled of parchment and cold metal. Maps covered the table, weighed down by carved stones. Generals ringed the room, mid-argument when I entered. Conversation stumbled when they saw me. Jonathan stood at the head, one hand braced on wood. He didn't announce me or explain. He simply said, "Kira, tell them what you told me about ravines." A few faces tightened in offense at being asked to listen to an Omega. I decided not to care. I stepped to the map and traced the narrow gorge. "If you keep hammering the front, they'll keep feeding troops to the obvious threat," I said. "You don't need the main gate if you make the enemy afraid of losing their own heart while they're busy guarding yours." There was pushback, questions, skepticism. But Jonathan let them argue with me directly, and by the end, 2 veteran commanders were bending over the map, with me, plotting angles as if it were natural. When the others left, Jonathan lingered by the window. "You see patterns I miss," he said. "I think differently," I answered. "You grew up swinging a sword. I grew up listening at doors and trying not to be noticed. Different angles?" He glanced over his shoulder. "You say that, like, your angle is less valuable? I was taught my whole life that my job was to make sure the tea didn't spill while men decided who lived and died," I said. "So yes, it feels strange to stand over a map with generals and have anyone pretend my thoughts matter." His gaze sharpened. I am not pretending. I believed him. That realization was more terrifying than his temper could have been. I started seeing the weight he carried then, the way he lingered over casualty reports longer than victory tallies, the way his shoulders tensed when messengers arrived late, as if every delay meant another death, the sleepless shadows under his eyes when he returned from the border and went straight to the infirmary instead of his bed. At night, I sometimes woke to find him standing at my window, shirtless, bare feet silent on stone. "Go back to sleep," he said the first time. "I was only checking the wards." "You have a dozen mages for that," I muttered. "I trust them," he said. "I trust my own eyes more." He looked like a man expecting the walls to fall at any moment. "You could lie down," I said. "Take some weight off your spine before it snaps." He huffed something that might have been a laugh. "You think my spine is the problem, Omega?" "I think you're holding up an entire kingdom and 3 dead queens with it," I said. At some point, something has to give. The next night, when restless pacing started again, he stopped at the foot of the bed. His hand found the edge of the mattress, fingers curling in the blanket. Slowly, like a man easing into cold water, he climbed in behind me and let his body settle against mine. He still didn't touch me beyond an arm draped loosely over my waist. No wandering hands, no demands. Just warmth and the steady thunder of his heart against my back, as if sharing body heat was another duty he had assigned himself. It should have felt like a trap. Instead, it felt like being chosen to hold a piece of the weight he carried. Somewhere in the middle of all that, my view of my own nature shifted. I had always been taught that being an Omega meant softness, sweetness, yielding, a creature to be sheltered and used, never trusted with edge or authority. But Jonathan never softened his world for me. He opened it and expected me to step into the blood and politics without flinching. In the yard, he relied on my speed and flexibility, forcing me to find ways to drop larger opponents using momentum, not brute strength. In the war room, he turned to me when talk grew vicious, asking quietly, "What are we not seeing?" As if my instincts were another weapon. Once, after I warned him that a visiting alpha's smiles hid dangerous desperation, he canceled a private audience. 2 days later, the same alpha was caught bribing a guard to poison the well. "How did you know?" Jonathan asked that night. "I didn't," I said, "but his scent went sharp every time someone mentioned your lack of air. Desperation has a flavor." He nodded slowly. "Then we will listen to that scent." He never called my intuition weakness, never told me to stop being sensitive. He treated it the way he treated my developing sword arm, with respect, as something to hone, not hide. It was a quiet, insidious thing, the way that started to matter. One evening, after a long day that left him grim-jawed and silent, we sat together before his hearth. A bottle of dark liquor opened between us. Firelight painted gold across his scars. If the goddess truly meant to punish you for your ancestors, she chose a cruel way, I said. He looked at me over his cup. "You think this is about me?" "You carry it like it is," I said. "Like every death, every loss is personal failure. You're only one man, Jonathan. A cursed one at that." Something in his expression softened. "And you are only one Omega, yet you keep walking into rooms full of men who would dismiss you and making them listen." I snorted. "That's because you're standing behind me." "No," he said quietly, "it's because you stand as if you are not afraid of falling, and because you make them forget that Omega ever meant weak." My throat tightened. In that moment, I realized what had been changing since the first day in the yard. My body had grown stronger, yes, but it was my sense of self that had shifted most. He wasn't trying to turn me into something other than Omega. He was forcing me to see that the very traits I had been taught to despise, my intuition, my sensitivity, my ability to read a room, were exactly what made me dangerous in his world. And he valued that danger. Sitting there, watching the most feared alpha in the kingdom trust me with his maps, his nights, his silence, I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. The man who had chained me to him saw power in me I had never been allowed to claim. That was the moment my hatred stopped feeling like a shield and started feeling like a cage of my own making. The summons to court came on a morning cold enough to bite. I was still sweating from drills when Jonathan strode into the yard in full formal dress, black and silver catching the weak sun. Warriors snapped to attention. He ignored them and came straight to me, gaze sweeping over my practice leathers, the sword still in my hand. "Tonight," he said. "Full court, the northern alphas are here. You will stand beside me." My fingers tightened on the hilt. As what? Proof the curse hasn't killed this queen yet? His jaw flexed. "As my queen." The word still scraped inside my chest, but he'd said it too many times now for me to pretend he didn't mean it. I nodded once. He turned and left without waiting for further argument, cloak snapping behind him. By evening, the great hall had transformed into a wolf's den dressed as a palace. Torches blazed, banners hung heavy from the rafters, and the air was thick with dominance and perfume and the sharp metallic edge of anticipation. This was not a celebration. It was a test. Mar laced me into a deep red gown that bared the curve of my throat and the edge of Jonathan's mark. My hair was braided and pinned with silver, more weapon than ornament. I barely recognized the woman in the polished metal mirror, an Omega wrapped in silk, wearing defiance like armor. When the doors opened, the roar of voices dipped, then thinned into a low murmur as I walked the aisle alone. I felt every stare like claws on my skin. Curiosity, contempt, hunger. I kept my head high and my steps measured, the way Jonathan had taught me. Move like you own the floor, even if they all know you don't. He waited at the base of the dais, crown on his brow, shoulders squared. When I reached him, he extended his hand. Not a command, an invitation. I took it. He led me up the steps and did not seat me behind him or to the side. There was only one throne, but he positioned me at his right shoulder, where every eye in the hall would see us as one line of power. The northern delegation entered late, all deliberate arrogance. At their head walked Gregor of Iron Peak, broad and thick-necked, gray in his beard and smug in every step. His gaze slid over the hall, paused on me long enough to make my skin crawl, then fixed on Jonathan with a predator's grin. "Alpha King," he said, voice carrying. "You summoned us to speak of borders and oaths. Instead, I find you parading a new bride." Low laughter rippled through his men. Jonathan's expression didn't flicker. "We can discuss several matters at once, Gregor. I assure you, my capacity is not as limited as yours." More laughter, this time from our side. Gregor's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps. Yet rumors blow colder than your mountain winds. They say you take queens the way other men take breath, and bury them just as quickly. 3 so far, yes?" His gaze flicked to me again. "And this one, still slender, still unclaimed. No air." The hall tightened around us. Jonathan's fingers dug into the arm of his throne. His wolf flooded the air, hot and furious. Gregor smelled it and smiled wider, sensing blood in the water. "A kingdom without an heir is a feast laid out for scavengers," Gregor went on. "You ask us to renew oaths to a line that ends with you. Perhaps it is time to consider a stronger house for the crown, one that can actually—" "Careful," I said. The single word cut clean through the noise. Every head turned toward me. I stepped forward, past the arm of the throne, so I stood at the edge of the dais looking down at Gregor. My heart hammered, but my voice was steady. "If you finish that sentence, I will assume you are volunteering to be the first example of what happens to those who insult my mate in his own hall." A murmur swept the room. Mate. I'd chosen the word on purpose. Gregor's brows shot up, bold tongue for an Omega bought with her father's life, bold tongue for a queen who has listened to you talk for less than 2 minutes and already grown bored, I replied. "You traveled across half the kingdom to stand here and repeat gossip like an old aunt? Disappointing." His smile thinned. "We speak of succession, of your king's failure to secure his line." "You speak of things you don't understand," I said. "You think a crown's strength lives only between a king's legs. How small your world must be." Laughter broke from somewhere near the back. Gregor flushed. "You mock the lack of heirs," I continued, voice rising. "But I see a king who has held this realm together through war and famine and betrayal, while packs like yours circle, snapping at scraps. And still you stand on his stone, under his banners, protected by his walls. Perhaps ask yourself what that says about his strength and your dependence." Gregor took a step closer to the dais, hands curling into fists. "Careful, girl. Iron Peak does not bow to soft throats and pretty words." "Oh, I agree," I said. "You bow to force, to fear, to the wolf who stands his ground while others posture. Look at him." I gestured back at Jonathan without turning. I could feel him just behind my shoulder, a wall of heat and restrained violence. "This is a king who has buried queens and enemies both," I said, "and still he stands. Still we stand. If you truly believed his line was finished, you wouldn't waste breath taunting him. You'd be mustering your warriors on our borders instead of hiding your trembling behind jokes." Silence, then a few low, appreciative chuckles. Not all of them from our side. Gregor's jaw worked. "You forget your place." "No," I said softly. I closed the last step between us until I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. "I am defining it." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Gregor stepped back. "My words were ill-chosen," he said through his teeth. "I meant no disrespect to your union." "Yes, you did," I answered, "but we'll pretend otherwise. For tonight," I turned my back on him, a calculated insult, and walked up the steps as if my legs weren't shaking. Jonathan watched me come, eyes burning. When I reached him, he caught my hand in his, fingers tight. "That was reckless," he murmured, low enough only I heard. "And magnificent." "You're welcome," I whispered. He faced the hall again, voice ringing with iron. "Let there be no more questions about my queen's place. Any who doubt it may take the matter up with her directly. If they dare—" A ripple of uneasy laughter. No one rushed to volunteer. Later, when the court finally dispersed and the hall emptied to echoes, we remained on the dais alone. I could still feel the imprint of 100 stares on my skin, but beneath it all was a sharper, brighter sensation, power. Not the kind I'd grown up fearing in alphas, the power to harm, to command, to take. This was the power of words landing like blows, of seeing a room full of wolves shift their stance because I refused to flinch. Jonathan turned to me fully. "Where did you learn to do that?" he asked. "From watching you," I said. "You walk into every room like you own it. I figured if I'm going to survive being your queen, I should stop acting like prey." His mouth curved, slow and genuine. "You are many things, Kira. Prey is not one of them." The bond between us hummed bright and hot. For the first time, I didn't fight the way it swelled with his pride. I let it wash over me, let myself stand a little taller. Tonight, in front of those watching eyes, I hadn't been a cursed king's chained omega. I had been his answer. The state dinner was meant to celebrate the Northern Alliance, but the air smelled wrong from the moment I entered the hall. Too sweet, too floral, like someone had tried to mask something rotten underneath perfume and roasted meat. I stood beside Jonathan at the high table, dressed in midnight blue silk, while servants moved between courses and delegates laughed too loudly over wine. Gregor sat 3 seats down, all forced smiles and hollow toasts. He had not forgiven my words from court, but tonight he played the gracious guest. That alone should have warned me. Jonathan leaned close as the 5th course arrived, his voice low. "You're tense. Something's wrong," I murmured. His hand found mine under the table, thumb brushing my knuckles. "Elaborate, I don't know yet. The air, the scent, it's off." He didn't dismiss me. His gaze swept the room once, cataloging exits and guards, then returned to his plate. "Stay close." The wine arrived in crystal decanters, dark red and gleaming. Servants poured with practiced efficiency, filling cups down the line. When they reached Jonathan's goblet, I watched the liquid catch torchlight, watched it settle, and my stomach twisted hard. There, beneath the wine's natural tang, something sharper, bitter, wrong. My wolf surged to the surface, hackles raised, every instinct screaming danger. "Don't," I said, louder than I meant to. Jonathan's hand froze halfway to his cup. The table went silent. Every eye turned to me. "Kira?" His voice was steady, but I saw the shift in his posture, the way his body coiled. I stood, knocking my chair back. "The wine. Don't drink it." Confusion rippled through the crowd. A few nervous laughs. Gregor's expression remained carefully neutral, but his heartbeat spiked. I could hear it from here, sharp and erratic. Jonathan set the goblet down slowly. "You're certain?" "Yes." He gestured to the nearest guard. "Bring the kitchen, master." Now the room erupted into murmurs. "Insult," some said. "Paranoia." Jonathan raised one hand and silence crashed down like a fist. "My queen," he said clearly, "has saved my life more than once with her instincts. If she says the wine is poisoned, I believe her." A servant stepped forward, pale and shaking. "Majesty, I poured it myself from the sealed—" "Taste it," Jonathan said. The man's face went gray. "Sire, I—" "Taste it," Jonathan repeated, voice dropping into something cold and final. The servant's hand trembled as he lifted Jonathan's goblet and brought it to his lips. He took one small sip, swallowed, and for a moment nothing happened. Then his eyes went wide. He choked, clutched his throat, and collapsed, convulsing on the stone floor. Foam flecked his lips. Within seconds he went still. Chaos exploded. Nobles lurched back from the table. Guards drew weapons. Gregor stood slowly, hands raised, face carefully blank. Jonathan was on his feet, sword half drawn, murder in his eyes. "Lock the hall," he snarled. "No one leaves until I know who did this." My legs felt weak, but I forced myself to stay upright, to stay beside him. The bond roared between us, his fury bleeding into my veins, my fear sharpening his focus. I could feel his heart hammering, could taste his rage like copper on my tongue. They found the poisoner within the hour. A kitchen boy, barely 16, bribed by someone in Gregor's retinue. He broke under questioning and named the man who'd paid him. By dawn, 3 heads decorated pikes outside the gates, and Gregor's delegation was expelled under armed escort. Jonathan didn't speak until we were alone in his chambers, the fire burning low, the taste of ash still thick in the air. He paced, restless and dangerous, still riding the edge of violence. I stood near the hearth, watching him, feeling the bond pull tight between us like a wire ready to snap. You saved my life, he said finally, stopping in front of me. I smelled it, I said. That's all. No. He stepped closer, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. You felt it, through the bond. Your wolf knew mine was in danger. My throat tightened. He was right. It hadn't been logic or caution. It had been pure instinct, the bond screaming at me to protect what was mine. Jonathan, I have lost 3 queens, he said, voice rough. 3 women who stood where you're standing now. Alina lasted a year before the curse took her in her sleep. Isara fell from the ramparts during a storm. Marin collapsed at her own blessing ceremony. His hands curled into fists. I felt each one die through the bond, felt their hearts stop, their fear, their pain, and I could do nothing. My chest ached. You don't have to tell me this. Yes, I do. He reached out, fingers brushing my jaw, tilting my face toward the light. Because tonight I felt you through the bond. Not fear, not pain, fury, protectiveness. You didn't cower when danger came for me. You stood and challenged it. His thumb traced my cheekbone, and I couldn't breathe. I am terrified of losing you, he whispered. Not because of the curse, not because of politics or heirs or any of the reasons I told myself mattered. Because somewhere in these weeks I stopped seeing you as my captive and started seeing you as my mate. The word landed between us, raw and honest. Jonathan, I tried again, but he shook his head. You don't have to say anything. I know I forced this bond. I know you didn't choose me. But tonight, when I thought I might die, the only thing I regretted was that I kissed him. I didn't plan it, didn't think. I just rose onto my toes and pressed my mouth to his, swallowing whatever confession he'd been about to make. For one stunned heartbeat, he went still. Then he groaned, low and desperate, and his hands came up to frame my face. He kissed me back like a man starving, like he'd been holding this hunger behind his teeth for weeks and finally had permission to let it free. His mouth was hot, demanding, tasting of wine and ash and something darker. I opened for him and he took, tongue sweeping against mine, one hand sliding into my hair to angle my head exactly where he wanted it. The bond flared between us, bright and wild, singing with relief and need and something that felt dangerously close to joy. I made a sound I didn't recognize, something between a gasp and a plea. He backed me against the wall, his body a solid line of heat against mine, and kissed me harder, deeper, until I couldn't tell where his breath ended and mine began. When he finally pulled back, we were both shaking. Kira, he said, voice wrecked, if you don't want this, if you're only reacting to the fear, tell me now. Because if I kiss you again, I will not be able to stop. I looked up at him, at the firelight painting gold across his scars, at the way he held himself so carefully even now, waiting for my answer. I don't want you to stop, I whispered. Something blazed in his eyes, fierce and possessive. He kissed me again, slower this time, reverent, as if I were something precious he was finally allowed to touch. His hands roamed my back, my waist, never straying but never leaving either, mapping me through silk with a restraint that made me ache. When we finally broke apart again, foreheads pressed together, breathing ragged, the bond between us hummed steady and bright, no longer pulling or demanding. Just there, acknowledged, accepted. I don't know when it happened, I admitted quietly, but somewhere between the training yard and the war room and tonight, I stopped hating you. He smiled against my temple. Good. Because I don't think I could survive hating you back. We stayed like that, tangled together in the firelight, until exhaustion finally dragged us toward his bed. He held me through the night, arms wrapped tight, as if even sleep might try to steal me away. And for the first time since the binding, I didn't dream of chains. I dreamed of choosing. The heat struck 3 days after the assassination attempt, and it felt like being shoved into a furnace from the inside out. One moment I was crossing the courtyard toward the training yard, thinking about footwork drills. The next, my knees buckled and white-hot fire ripped through my veins. My vision blurred. Every inch of my skin became too tight, too sensitive, too aware of the bond humming between Jonathan and me like a live wire. Someone shouted my name. Boots pounded on stone. Then his scent hit me. Pine, steel, smoke, alpha, and my wolf surged so hard I almost sobbed with relief. Strong arms caught me before I hit the ground. Kira, his voice was raw. Look at me. I dragged my gaze up. Jonathan's face swam into focus, his pupils blown wide, jaw clenched so hard a vein jumped in his neck. Even through the haze I could tell his scent had changed, rut already stirring in answer to my heat. Alpha, I whispered before I could stop myself. Every muscle in his body went rigid. He scooped me up and barked orders I couldn't follow. Clear the halls, lock the inner doors, no one comes near. The fortress blurred past, stone, torches, startled faces, until a heavy door slammed and the world narrowed to the familiar shadows of his chambers. He laid me on the bed like I was made of glass. The sheets felt like ice and flame all at once. I arched against them, desperate for relief I couldn't name. "What's happening?" I gasped, even though I already knew. "Your first heat," he said, voice strained. It came early. Another wave hit, harder, and I curled on myself, nails digging into my palms. My body ached, empty and burning, every instinct howling one word: mate. "Please," I choked. "It hurts." His hand closed around mine, grip firm, grounding. I felt the tremor in his fingers, the way his breathing had turned shallow. "I know," he said. "I'm here. You're safe." Safe was a lie when every cell in me was screaming to climb him, sink my teeth into his throat, drag him down, and let instinct finish what the bond had started. I reached for him with my free hand, fisting his shirt. "Jonathan," I begged. "Please, I need—" His other hand caught my wrist, gently but firmly, and pressed it back to the mattress. "No." The word cut through the fog like cold water. I stared at him, panting. "No?" His eyes were almost black now, the gold swallowed by blown pupils, but his gaze stayed fixed on my face, not on the skin my thin shift did nothing to hide. "You're not thinking clearly," he said. "Your heat is. Your body is. That is not the same as consent." Another wave slammed into me, worse than the last. I bit back a cry and failed, shame and desperation tangling in my throat. "I'm asking," I insisted. "I want you. Please, Jonathan, it hurts. I can't." A low growl rumbled in his chest, not directed at me but at himself. He surged to his feet, taking a step back like distance alone could save us. "You think I don't want you?" His voice was ragged. "I can barely breathe in here. Every part of me is telling me to take what you're offering, but I will not touch you like this." The room spun. I clutched at the sheets, furious tears burning my eyes. "You and your damned honor," I spat. "What is it worth if I'm dying?" "You're not dying," he said. "You're burning. There's a difference." For the next 3 days, I learned exactly what that difference felt like. Heat came in brutal waves. My body flushed hot, then shivered, then burned again. I soaked the sheets and shredded them with my nails. I cursed him. I begged him. I cried until my voice went raw. Through all of it, Jonathan stayed. He barred the doors himself, snarling at any guard who came too close. When another alpha got within scent range, his growl was so vicious I felt it through the stone. He brought me water when my throat was too dry to swallow, held the cup to my lips when my hands shook. He wiped sweat from my face with a damp cloth, changed the linens when I'd thrashed them into knots. Whenever a wave broke me open, I reached for him. Sometimes I caught his wrist, sometimes his arm, once the front of his shirt, and dragged him down, until his forehead rested against mine. "Please," I whispered over and over. "Please, please." Every time he shook his head, even when his breath shuddered, and I could feel his control fraying. "If I take you now," he said once, voice so low it was almost a growl, "you will wake when this passes, and wonder if any of it was your choice. I will not live with that." On the second night, his rut hit fully. I smelled it before I saw it. The sudden sharp spike in his scent, darker and thicker, alpha cranked to a brutal intensity. He doubled over with a harsh curse, bracing his hands on the bedpost, shoulders heaving. The air turned electric. My wolf went wild, pressing against my skin, desperate to get to him. He forced himself upright, eyes completely black now. If not for the way his jaw clenched, he would have looked feral. "Get out," I gasped. "You have to get out, Jonathan. You can't." "I am not leaving you," he snarled, and for a moment I saw the war inside him. King, mate, man, beast, all pulling in different directions. Then he did the last thing I expected. He climbed onto the bed behind me and pulled me back against his chest, one arm banded firmly around my middle, the other pinning my wrists gently but unyieldingly to my own body. His cock was a hard, undeniable line against my spine. His entire body shook with the effort of not moving. "I will hold you through this," he ground out. Nothing more. The contact was a torment and a mercy. His scent wrapped around me, drowning out everything else. The bond roared, then settled into a fierce, steady burn. Each wave of heat crashed against the wall of his control and broke there, leaving me gasping but not lost. At some point, half mad, I twisted in his hold enough to meet his eyes. "You'll break," I whispered. "No one can fight instinct this long." He smiled then, a wrecked, strained thing. "Watch me. I don't know when I finally passed out. I remember only his heartbeat under my cheek, his hand stroking my hair in slow, trembling motions, and his voice, rough and steady, murmuring nonsense in my ear like a lullaby made of curses and promises. When I woke, the fire had burned low. My body ached, but the fever had broken. The sharp, gnawing emptiness was gone, leaving only soreness and bone-deep exhaustion. The bond lay quiet, a warm hum instead of a scream. Jonathan was still there. He sat slumped against the headboard, head tilted back, eyes closed. Dark stubble shadowed his jaw, and there were bruised hollows under his eyes. His shirt was half unbuttoned, chest rising and falling in slow, even breaths. One arm was still wrapped around me, holding me close even in sleep, as if part of him hadn't believed the danger was over. I shifted. His eyes snapped open. "Kira," he said, and somehow my name in his mouth sounded like a prayer and a question at once. "How do you feel?" "Like I picked a fight with a dragon and lost," I rasped. "But clear?" Relief crashed over his face so hard it nearly undid me. He dropped his forehead to mine, exhaling shakily. "Good. Thank the goddess," he muttered. I thought... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. I could feel it in the way his arm tightened around me, in the faint tremor still running through his muscles. "You stayed," I said. "Of course I stayed. You could have walked out, gone to some empty wing, ridden your rut out alone." "I could have," he agreed. His gaze locked with mine, raw and unguarded. "But you would have been here, burning, calling for me. I am not strong enough to abandon you to that. I am only strong enough not to take advantage of it." Silence settled between us, thick and fragile. "Why?" I asked quietly, though I already knew. "Because your choice matters more to me than my comfort," he said simply. "More than my sanity. More than my life, if it comes to that. I will not be another man who took what your body offered while your mind screamed no, even if instinct dresses that no up as a plea." Something in me gave way then, a final, stubborn piece of resistance that had clung on through training and war councils and assassination attempts and kisses in the dark. "I love you," I heard myself say. His breath caught. "Kira, I do," I pushed on, heart racing. "Not because of the bond, not because of the curse. Because you are the only alpha I have ever known who would lock himself in a room with his mate in heat, endure his own rut, and still choose my will over his body. Because you terrify me and steady me and make me feel like more than something to be traded." His eyes closed briefly, like the words physically hurt. When he opened them again, they shone. "You're sure," he said. "Tell me you're sure. Not high on leftover hormones, not grateful delirium." "I'm sure," I said. "I fell somewhere between your damned war maps and you holding me like I was breakable and still refusing to break me. I just didn't admit it until now." He cupped my face in both hands, rough palms gentle. "I love you too," he said. "No hesitation, no fear. I don't know when it happened either, but it did. And it is the first thing in my cursed life that feels right." He kissed me then, slow and deep and devastatingly tender. There was no fever behind it, no frantic edge. Just two people choosing each other with clear eyes and scars bared. When we finally pulled apart, resting our foreheads together, the bond between us felt different. No longer a chain, no longer a threat. A living thing we had both agreed to feed. In that quiet, with his heartbeat under my hands and the taste of him still on my lips, I realized something simple and terrifying. The king who could have taken everything from me had chosen, again and again, to give me back myself instead. And I had fallen in love with him for it. I chose him on a night when the moon was full and the fortress lay quiet under fresh snow. Not because my heat demanded it, not because the bond pulled or the curse whispered, because I wanted him, and I was finally ready to say it out loud without fear or hesitation. I found him in his study, bent over maps by candlelight, ink staining his fingers. He looked up when I entered, surprise flickering across his face. "Kira, it's late. Are you—" "I want to complete the bond," I said. He went completely still. The quill slipped from his fingers. "Say that again." I crossed the room slowly, deliberately, until I stood on the other side of his desk. "I want you, Jonathan. Not because of duty or instinct. Because I choose you. Because I love you. And I'm ready." His throat worked. "You're certain. I've never been more certain of anything." He rose, moving around the desk like a man afraid sudden movement might shatter the moment. When he reached me, his hands came up to frame my face, searching my eyes. "If we do this," he said quietly, "there is no undoing it. The bond will lock completely. You will be mine, and I will be yours in every way that matters." "I know," I said. "That's what I want." Something blazed in his gaze, fierce and possessive and awed all at once. "Then we do this properly, on your terms, your way." I had already thought it through. No grand ceremony, no court witnesses or political theater, just us in his chambers under moon and fire and the weight of our own choices. We walked there together, fingers entwined, the bond humming between us like a song finally allowed to finish. Inside, I lit candles while he watched, silent and patient. When the room glowed warm, I turned to him. "No vows written by someone else," I said. "Just truth." He nodded. I took his hands in mine, heart racing but steady. "I, Kira Stone, claim you as my mate. Not because I was forced, not because fate demanded it, because you saw strength in me when the world only saw weakness, because you gave me choice when you could have taken everything, because you are worth choosing." His eyes shone in the candlelight. He lifted my hands to his lips, kissing my knuckles, then my wrists, right over the mark he'd given me months ago. "I, Jonathan, king of this realm and alpha of my pack, claim you as my mate," he said, voice rough. "Not to break a curse or secure a throne. Because you challenged me, matched me, and made me remember what it feels like to hope. Because loving you is the first brave thing I have done in years." The bond flared between us, bright and fierce. Then he kissed me, and the world narrowed to heat and touch and the slide of his mouth against mine. He was careful at first, giving me space to pull away, to change my mind. I answered by pulling him closer, by opening for him, by letting every wall I'd built come crashing down. What followed was both tender and desperate. He undressed me slowly, reverently, like unwrapping something sacred. His hands mapped every inch of skin, his mouth following, murmuring words in languages I didn't know but understood in my bones. When he finally joined us, the bond snapped into place with a force that stole my breath. Power surged through me, through us, wild and ancient and right. I felt his heart beating in time with mine, felt his soul pressing against my own. The curse, that old, rotted thing that had clung to his bloodline for generations, shattered like glass under the weight of our joined wills. The room blazed with light. Runes etched into the walls centuries ago flared gold, then faded, their purpose fulfilled. Jonathan gasped against my throat, his entire body shaking. "It's gone," he whispered, disbelief and wonder tangled in his voice. "Kira, the curse, it's gone." I felt it too, the absence where poison had lived, replaced by something clean and strong and ours. We stayed tangled together, breathing hard, foreheads pressed close. His hand found mine, fingers lacing tight. "I love you," he said. "I love you too." For a brief, perfect moment, the world was still. Then the warning bells began to ring. Jonathan's head snapped toward the window, his entire body going rigid. Shouts erupted from the courtyard below, followed by the clash of steel and the howl of attacking wolves. "No," he snarled, already moving. He threw on trousers and grabbed his sword from where it leaned against the wall. "Not now. Not tonight." I scrambled for my clothes, fingers clumsy. "What's happening?" "Attack," he said grimly. "Someone chose tonight on purpose." The door burst open. One of his captains stood there, bloodied and panting. "Sire, Damien's forces breached the outer wall. He's pushing toward the keep. He's asking for the Omega." Ice flooded my veins. Damien, the rival Alpha King who'd been circling Jonathan's borders for years, waiting for weakness. Jonathan's growl was low and lethal. "He can ask all he wants. He'll get my blade through his throat." He turned to me, eyes blazing. "Stay here. Bar the door. Do not open it for anyone but me." "I'm not hiding while you fight," I said. "Kira, I can fight," I cut in. "You trained me for this." He looked like he wanted to argue, but another explosion rocked the fortress. He cursed, grabbed my face, and kissed me hard. "Stay close to me," he ordered. "And if I tell you to run, you run. Understand?" I nodded, even though we both knew I was lying. We descended into chaos. The halls were filled with smoke and the clash of steel. Jonathan's wolves fought viciously, but Damien had brought numbers. Bodies littered the stone, some ours, some theirs. My stomach turned, but I forced myself to keep moving. Jonathan fought like a force of nature, cutting through enemies with brutal efficiency. I stayed at his back, blade in hand, the training from months in the yard finally put to use. When one of Damien's men lunged for me, I sidestepped and drove my dagger up under his ribs exactly the way Jonathan had taught me. He went down hard. I didn't let myself think about it. We reached the throne room just as Damien himself strode through the main doors, flanked by a dozen warriors. He was tall, broad, scarred, everything an Alpha King should look like. His eyes found me immediately, and he smiled. "There she is," he said, "the unclaimed queen, except—" His nostrils flared. "Not so unclaimed anymore. Pity. I was hoping to take you intact." Jonathan stepped in front of me, sword raised. "You'll take nothing but steel, Damien." Damien laughed. "Your curse is broken. I can smell it. Which means she carries your heir now, or will soon." "I can't allow that, Jonathan. Your line ends tonight." "Then come and end it," Jonathan snarled. They collided with a crash that shook the hall. They expected a terrified Omega cowering behind her Alpha. They got something else entirely. When Damien's lieutenant lunged for me while Jonathan was locked in combat, something inside me snapped. Not fear, not panic, pure incandescent rage. The bond between Jonathan and me blazed white-hot, and power I didn't know I possessed erupted from my core. It wasn't strength or speed. It was something older, deeper, woven into the fabric of what it meant to be Omega. Protective fury given form. I screamed, and the sound carried weight that knocked 3 warriors off their feet. The air around me shimmered. Damien's men stumbled back, suddenly unable to advance, as if an invisible wall had slammed down between us. My wolf surged to the surface, not submissive but sovereign, and every Alpha in the room felt it like a punch to the chest. "You will not touch him," I snarled, and my voice resonated with something primal. "You will not take what is mine." Damien's eyes went wide. "Impossible. Omegas don't." "This one does," I said. Jonathan fought like a demon beside me, cutting through Damien's forces with brutal precision. But now I wasn't just defending myself. I was defending him. Every time an enemy got close, that strange power lashed out, throwing them back, disrupting their attacks, giving Jonathan the openings he needed. Fighting together for years instead of months. He covered my left. I watched his right. When he stumbled over a body, I steadied him. When 2 warriors came at me simultaneously, his blade was there before I could blink. Damien realized too late that he hadn't come to fight a cursed king clinging to a dying bloodline. He'd come to fight a mated pair whose bond had unlocked something his spies hadn't anticipated. Jonathan disarmed him with a vicious strike that sent Damien's sword clattering across stone. Before Damien could recover, Jonathan had him on his knees, blade at his throat. "You lose," Jonathan said. Damien spat blood. "Kill me then. My pack will return." "No," I said, stepping forward. "They won't, because you're going to call them off, swear a blood oath never to threaten this kingdom again, and live the rest of your miserable life, knowing you were beaten by the queen you tried to steal." Damien's jaw clenched, but he saw the alternative in Jonathan's eyes. Death, slow and public. He swore the oath. By dawn, Damien's forces had retreated, our walls held, The halls stank of smoke and blood, but we had won. Jonathan found me in the throne room, both of us battered and exhausted. He pulled me into his arms without a word, and we stood there as the sun rose through the shattered windows, breathing each other in. "You saved my life," he murmured against my hair. "We saved each other," I corrected. 3 months later, the healers confirmed what I already knew. Twins, a boy and a girl, growing strong beneath my heart. Jonathan wept when they told him, not from fear this time, from joy. My coronation happened on the first day of spring, not as consort or decoration, but as co-ruler. Jonathan placed a crown on my head himself and announced to the assembled court that I would rule beside him in all things. My word as binding as his. Some of the northern alphas grumbled. Most cheered. I didn't care either way. I had stopped needing their approval the day I realized my power came from within, not from their recognition. Our twins were born healthy and howling under a summer moon. Lyra, fierce from her first breath. Caden, thoughtful and watchful even as an infant. 2 years later, our son Riker joined them, completing our family in ways I'd never imagined wanting. 5 years after the binding that should have been my death sentence, I stood on the balcony overlooking the kingdom and marveled at how much had changed. The fortress had been rebuilt, stronger. The northern packs had bent knee willingly once they saw the prosperity our reign brought. Laws protecting Omegas had spread across allied territories. And Jonathan, the cursed king who'd once carried the weight of 3 dead queens, now smiled more than he brooded. He found me there, slipping his arms around my waist, chin resting on my shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I should have hated you," I said honestly, "that by all rights this should have ended in tragedy." His arms tightened. But it didn't. No. I turned in his embrace, meeting his eyes. "It didn't, because you gave me something no one else ever had." "What's that?" "Choice," I said simply. "You forced the bond, but you never forced me, and somehow that made all the difference." He kissed me softly, the kind of kiss that still made my heart race even after years of marriage. "I would do it all again," he said. "Every mistake, every struggle, every moment of doubt, because it led here, to you, to them." He nodded toward the window where our children's laughter echoed from the courtyard below. I smiled against his mouth. "Even the curse?" "Especially the curse," he said, "because breaking it with you taught me what love actually means." We stood together as the sun set, 2 people who'd found light in the darkest circumstances, who'd chosen each other again and again until the choosing became as natural as breathing. The bond that had been forced upon me became the foundation of everything I built. Queen, mate, mother, warrior, all of it born from a choice I made in chains and reclaimed in freedom. Sometimes the worst beginning leads to the most unexpected happiness. Sometimes a curse breaks, and what rises from the ashes is stronger than anything that came before. And sometimes the Omega everyone underestimated becomes the queen no one dares to challenge. I wouldn't change a single moment. Where are you watching from, and what was your favorite moment in Kira and Jonathan's journey? Was it the first kiss after the assassination attempt, the heat where he proved his honor, or the moment Kira unleashed her Omega power and fought beside her king? Drop a comment below and let me know. And if you loved this story, you're going to want to stay close. I have an uncensored werewolf romance novella coming very soon, diving even deeper into the world of forbidden bonds, fated mates, and the kind of passion that rewrites destiny. You won't want to miss it. Until then, remember, sometimes the chains we fear become the freedom we choose. Thank you for following Kira and Jonathan's story. See you in the next one.